Okay.
Okay, you're good. I'm out.
All right. So today I'll be talking about basic photography. So this is geared towards beginners and for those who know photography a little bit but don't necessarily know how to work their settings or compose properly, then this is the workshop for you. Okay. Okay. So now, what to expect from this class? You will have a better understanding of light and the exposure triangle. You will learn practical tips on composing portraits, and you'll know how editing can influence the outcome of your photo. Okay. Oops, sorry. So this is me. I'm a photographer. I've been doing photography for 10 years now. I specialize in weddings, portraits, and food photography. So since 2013 to 2019, I was the senior photographer at Rainbow Fish Studios. It's a wedding photography studio that's based in Cebu. But since I moved to Manila last year, because I recently just got married, I was able to join the Metro Photo team. And then I'm also the owner of Art Flavor Photography. It is more focused on food. All right. Now let me ask you, what is photography to you? So in this portion, you can turn on your mics or maybe chat it in the chat box. So Charm, can you please read?
No worries. I can read what everyone's saying. So someone said art, capturing photos, playing with light, capturing moments, art of capturing moments to make them last forever, self-expression, memories, and capturing moments.
Yes. So those are really good answers.
Yeah, forever.
Okay. So yes, actually, photography is the art of capturing light with a camera to create an image. So that's basically it. You can, photography is not limited now to just the DSLR. Even your camera phone can take as, good photos than the DSLR as well. So never underestimate your mobile phone. Now, let me just share with you a short history of photography. So, 1826, the first photograph was developed by Joseph Nicephore Niepce. I hope I pronounced that correctly. And in 1838, the first photograph with a human was created by Luis Daguerre. So you see this little tiny human here. So yeah, basically, it's not a portrait, but you see a person right there, and they consider it to be the first photograph with the human. And now here on 1839, the first self-portrait was introduced by Robert Cornelius. Now, I just want you to, realize that technology has definitely changed over the years, and it makes me appreciate how much we've developed, how much it has improved our photography to what it is now. Okay, so why is photography important? Why do you think it is important?
For memories, for documentation. Someone said
Right.
to capture history.
Good. So here is a brief reason why photography is important. So photographs are powerful tools of influence and information. Now, you know, we live in a time where we're basically bombarded by visual information, be it in social media and the internet and the news. So images are just really thrown at us every day. So now I just want to basically equip you with the essentials or the basics of photography to prepare you for the outside world. Right? So I want to start with the exposure triangle. So the exposure triangle is basically made up of the aperture, the shutter speed, and the ISO. So what are these things? First, the aperture, it basically controls the amount of light passing through the camera. And two, it determines the depth of field. And the shutter speed now changes the brightness of your photo, and it also creates dramatic effects by either freezing action or blurring motion. And lastly, the ISO, it brightens or darkens a photo, and it also adds noise or grain. Now let's get into the first part, which is the aperture. Basically, the aperture means that the small numbers represent large apertures, while large numbers, like the f-stop 11, represent small apertures. I know some beginners are confused by this. If you say, when someone tells you, okay, shoot in a larger aperture, but then it means you should shoot in the smaller number, which is 1.8, and vice versa. So let's get back to our anatomy real quick. So the aperture, they say, is like the pupil of photography. So basically, when you look outside to a bright sunny day, your eye or your pupil constricts, or it narrows down. It gets smaller. And then when you look at a darker environment or background, your pupil then enlarges. So how do we relate this to the aperture? So basically, this is the same principle here. When your eye or your pupil dilates or enlarges, it lets in more light. And now here, when it constricts or narrows down, it doesn't let in light as much. So for example, how does aperture relate to exposure? Here are 3 examples. So the larger aperture lets in more light, like I said earlier. So if you take this outdoors in 1.8 aperture or f-stop, you will get a bright image. Now, if you continue to lower down your f-stop to 5.6, you get a perfectly exposed image. And then when you go down again to f11, it darkens the image. Okay, now how does aperture affect the depth of field? The depth of field, if you don't know, is the amount of your photograph that appears sharp. Now here in the first image, I'm using the f-stop 2.0. So, you see those photographs, right, that have really creamy backgrounds. And some say that is called the shallow depth of field. And that is good for when you start taking pictures of portraits, solo portraits, or just small details to separate your subject from the background. Now here, this is actually a wedding photo, my wedding photo with my bridesmaids, because I couldn't find another photo or reference. So here, when you're shooting portraits, And especially when you're shooting a wide group or a large number, you should increase your f-stop to 5.6. 3.5 to 5.6 is a good number so that the rest of the people in the background won't be blurry. Okay, I hope you got that. So when you're shooting portraits, it's good to use a larger aperture. And when you're shooting a large number or a group, you should use a smaller aperture. Okay, next is the shutter speed. Now your shutter speed is the length of time that the camera shutter is open, exposing light onto the camera sensor. So I think it is explanatory here. So here in 1/500 of a second, you are freezing the moment without getting any motion blur. Now, if you lower it down, you will obviously see more motion. So this is good for instance when you really want to capture the motion of your subject, like when they're running, they're twirling, or doing something. It's good to experiment with the shutter speed. Now here, here's an image where I'm using 1/10 of a second. In this image, I wanted to portray, movement. So I purposely put down my shutter speed to achieve the shot. And here, in 1/500 of a second, I was able to freeze the moment, capturing, the movement of her hair and also the splashes in the water. So it depends on you, on the particular maybe style or story that you want to portray. So it's up to you and how you adjust your shutter speed. Now, lastly, the ISO. ISO is simply a camera setting that will brighten or darken a photo. So here in ISO 100, you can see that the image is not well exposed. Here in ISO 800, I bumped it up a bit to get the right exposure. However, I'm getting a bit of noise or grain in my photo. Then when I bump it up to 3200 again, I get this image where it's overexposed and I get a lot of noise as well. So the trick really is to lower your ISO. So that is if your purpose really is to have a high resolution, you should lower your ISO to 100, 200, or maybe 400, depending on your location, where you are. So now to explain this further, to explain it simply, I want you to think that the exposure triangle, these three things, is this. First, I want you to imagine a dance floor. So basically the dance floor is your ISO. It's your base, it's your foundation. And your aperture and your shutter speed are your dancers. So whenever you're in maybe a room or in a particular setting, you have to set your ISO first. So that is your base. And then once that's set, you can then play around with your aperture, figure out, okay, what am I shooting? Will I be shooting a portrait, a solo portrait, or will I be shooting a large group? Then I should adjust my aperture accordingly. And also, then I will adjust my shutter speed. So for me, my priority is my aperture. And yeah. I hope you learned something about the exposure triangle. Now here is a simple quote that says, "Great photography is about the depth of feeling, not depth of field." It is by Peter Adams. I understand that for some beginners, they go crazy over the depth of field or how narrow or how blurry the background is without being able to tell a good story. So your priority, or maybe as you improve, as you grow in your photography, you will learn that it's always essential to, capture these moments, make sure that these photographs relate to your audience. Okay, now next, I'll be talking about the types of light. First is soft light. The soft light, it is created from a scattered or diffused light source. Now with soft light, sorry, here I have a few images here. Okay, portraying the soft light. Now, why do you say this is soft light? Because I am basically diffusing the light. It is not directly hitting my subjects. Now here, you can see in the far right, where this is outdoors. How do you say that this is soft light? Basically, your clouds are diffusing the sun to create a more overcast or a more balanced photo. So this is when there is a gradual increase from light to dark. Okay, now here in the hard light, the opposite of the soft light, it creates sharp, harsh shadow lines in the subject. For example, here, you can see that there is no gradual increase in darks and shadows. It is just light and dark. So you can play around with this with your models, look for areas where there are shadows. And yeah, also a tip when you're shooting outdoors, especially during midday or noontime, the sun is really high. So what I would do is I would let my model or subject look towards the sun, so they can always close their eyes. And here's a sample of when you're shooting under the sun. You see here that you are getting really harsh or dark shadows around the eye area. So you should watch out for that when you're shooting under the sun. Always make them maybe lift their chin a little bit or look up. Just be more artsy when you take photos under the sun. This is not the time to take really close-up images of your subject, because you're just gonna get really unpleasant lighting. Okay, next is the side light. So side light is basically one side of a subject that is lit and the other side is in shadow. So here in my examples, the side light is I'm just getting one source of light from one side, creating this image right here. It is also a gradual, increase from light to dark, but it's not as harsh as hard light, because you have your window to diffuse the natural light that is coming in. So most of the time I shoot, next to a window to get the really pretty light on my subject. And if I want to fix the harsh shadows on the other side, I usually just get a reflector or something around that's white and large to reflect back that light onto the model. Okay, and lastly, we have the backlight. It is when your subject is illuminated from behind. Here are a few samples. Okay, so here, the first image, you can see that the window is right behind her, and you get this really beautiful glow reflecting towards her back, right? And you see these highlights just giving this really beautiful outline of her face. And here, in the second image, this is another particular type of backlight. They say it's called the rim lighting, where the light is not necessarily, you can't see the light behind my model, right? You see a black background. But then I just skewed a little bit to the side to still get that beautiful outline where the highlights are hitting her face and her body. And then the last one is where I wanted, it's not a typical silhouette where my subject is entirely black. You see those beautiful sunset photos, right? Where they're just black, you can just see their outline. But here it's like a semi-silhouette. You can still see a bit of her form and her face. So just experiment again with your backlight and see what you get. You hear another quote, wherever there is light, one can photograph. So just experiment, see which light you prefer or you enjoy most. Go from the side to back and play around with the shadows to make your photos look more interesting. Okay, next is the composition tips. I'll just run through these quickly. So first, I want to share with you that you should leave enough headroom. Don't crop on the joints. Frame your subject. Mind your background. Don't forget the details. Also, make the horizon straight and include teen elements to create a story. Okay, so you should leave enough headroom. They say that you should put your eyes, the eyes of your subject or your face or their face on the 2/3 of your frame. So here I gave just the right amount of headroom so it doesn't look too, constricted or too close. There are instances where this works, but for now, I want you to always remember to leave enough headroom so, your photo will look pleasing. Okay. Next is don't crop from the joints. Now here is a full body picture of Kim. Now, what if I went closer and cropped her body this way? Then you can obviously see that I cropped her feet and it does not look pleasing at all. So just a reminder, don't crop on the joints where right here in your elbow, your hips, your knees, and your feet. So here's another example of the beautiful Jessica Knight. She's here with us tonight. So with this image, I wanted to crop it because the lines on her sides were distracting me. So what I did, so first I went on to a medium crop, and what this did, it cropped off her wrist and her elbow. So for me, it does not look good. It's just not visually pleasing. So I went in closer and cropped my image this way. So I was able to focus more on her face, her expression, and her body without cutting, unnecessary parts. Next, frame your subject. Now here you can use natural elements around you. You can use, like, for example, this image, I used the cave, the triangle shape around them to frame my subjects perfectly. Now you can also use, trees around you, whatever you can find. And now here I also framed my couple inside this window to create a more interesting image. Next is mind your background. So with this, I mean, you should always look out for those things behind your model or your subject. Make sure there's nothing sticking out behind their heads or anything distracting that can just ruin your photo. Like for example, this picture, I'm not exactly happy with this because I framed the window jammed right on top of her head, which makes it distracting. So if I were to make this, if I were to edit this again, I would just take this out to create a better image. And also just mind the things behind you. For example, there's like an unwanted, maybe water bottle or something that's colorful behind them, take it out so you won't ruin your image. Next, don't forget the details. So now when you're focusing or when you're taking pictures of your subject, you always focus on their face, their body, but then you tend to forget the details. So I encourage you to get a little closer to your model, get those really interesting details of her hand, maybe just half of the body, bottom part, or maybe the details of her clothing. That would be really good. Like for example, this, I did not focus on my model. I focused on the beautiful vase behind her. And also here, like I said earlier, you can always take pictures of hands. Now, why do you do this? Do this to complete the story, you not to give variety to your photo set. So it's always good to get closer to your model. Now make the horizon straight. Now I see a lot of images that are like this. The horizon is just a little bit tilted. So I encourage you to always watch out for that. And if you took it that way and you can't change it, just edit it in post and make it, more straight. I actually think this photo is not as straight as I wanted it to be. Anyway, unless you purposely want the horizon to be, angled. Like here, this is in maybe a 45-30 degree angle. And that's acceptable because that's how you want your image to be like. Now, last is include your scene elements to create a story. Now, don't forget when you're creating or when you're taking pictures of your subjects to take a step back. Try to get more of your subject's background and environment to tell the viewer the story, like what this subject is trying to say. Same as here. I just moved back a couple of meters to get this shot. It's important to always get a variety. Like I said, get a variety of angles. You can get a wide shot, close up, and also the middle angle. Now here's another quote from Elliot Erwitt. He said, "Photography is an art of observation. It has little to do with the things you see and everything to do with the way you see them." Now, lastly, I want to talk about editing. I wanted to keep this short, so I didn't make my slides too long. Now here, I want to express that color can dramatically affect the moods, feelings, and emotions. So for example, here, this is my original photo. And then now, I edited it a bit to a cooler tone and made it to this color. And then I also adjusted it then to give it warmer tones. So for this, with cool colors, they include blues, greens, and neutrals. They are calming, soothing, and serene, but it also represents a sad, aloof, and cold feeling. So with the image earlier, how did you feel about it, right? It seemed like it was a cold day. It feels like it's about to storm in their area. So it depends on how you want to portray the story. So editing plays a really big role in creating or completing the story with your image. Now here with warm colors include reds, yellows, and oranges. They give an inviting, happy, and cozy vibe, but it can also represent the feeling of anxiety and anger. So here in this photo, how do you feel about it? Right? It feels quite eerie and also sort of apocalyptic. So just with the change of temperature, I was able to create a different mood with the photo. So I encourage you to just play around with the colors of your photo depending on the story that you want to tell. So here, it is not about how a photo looks, it's about how a photo feels. So like I said earlier, you know, it's more, it doesn't matter, you know, how you took the shot. What matters is what's in the shot. You know, how the photo relates to you or connects with you. Then that's what makes a photo really impactful and influential. Okay, I will just share a quick editing trick here. I'll show you here. Okay. Here, can you see my screen? I'm on my Lightroom.
Yes, we can
Okay,
see.
cool. Sige. So here is a photo I took of my model, Danica. All right. So here, I will just quickly show you how I edited this photo. All right, let's just reset this image. All right, so there you can see my raw photo. So usually when I edit my photos, I start by putting a preset that I've made or that I purchased. But here I just want to quickly show you how to edit even without the preset. So first you have to keep in mind how you want your photo to look like. For this, I wanted it to look warm and cozy. So I'll adjust my exposure just a little bit and then move down my contrast because it was too bright for me in some areas. Lower my highlights. I always like lowering my highlights so it won't be too harsh on the skin, also as well as my whites, and then decrease the blacks. So depends on your photo. For now, since I want it to be cozy, dreamy, I usually bump down the clarity to give it off like a dreamy feel or ethereal maybe. All right, next up, I then edit my model's skin. So since her skin is too orange, here I go down to my HSL color setting right here in the side. I know some of you might not be as familiar, but this is, you can actually do this in your Lightroom mobile app. This is just a, you know, a bigger screen. So I put down my saturation a bit. Maybe I can lower down my luminance as well. And then since I wanted it to be a bit warm, so I increased the temperature and also increased the tint a bit to a more magenta hue. And then I lower my saturation since I want to achieve a more muted look. Like I wanted to feel romantic. So romantic photos, I don't really think that saturated colors will fit this image. Okay, usually it's already sharpened. I also bump up my luminance, my noise reduction, the contrast, everything here. I'm not very particular, I just want it up there to still, to make the details a bit smoother. And then that's it. Sometimes I even add a grain just to add a bit of character to my photos. There you go. So this is the before image and after. So I hope you see the difference there. Before, after. It looks more muted, more romantic, I guess. Very soft and feminine. Thank you, Chiefs. Okay, so now I want to ask you, oh, sorry. Okay, let me just summarize everything that we've learned. So we understood how to use the exposure triangle better. We learned about different types of light. We know how to compose properly now, and we realized that colors affect the way we perceive photos. Okay, thank you guys for joining.